Hello and welcome to Breaking Bread with Rivaaj Maharaj, where nothing is off the table. For today's episode, I wanted to talk about the current escalations in the Persian Gulf and what it means. So without further ado, let's get into it. I've come across an article in the Jerusalem Post that I'm going to analyze and go over and give you my take on what is going on. So let me get hold of this article and put it up here. Okay, so this is an article in the Jerusalem Post, and the heading is, "I would think twice about flying. Iran conflict much closer. Post-Geneva talks expert warns." So we know that the Americans and the Iranians are having talks in Oman, and we know that they are indirect talks. So that means that the Iranians speak to the mediators, and then the Americans on a separate occasion speak to the mediators, and then it's a lot of back and forth between the mediators. So it's basically a middleman, and negotiations are being conducted in that way. While the Iranian side has been releasing information saying that they prepare to do a deal with Donald Trump and they prepare to offer him, mining rights, oil rights, these types of things. They're trying to do a deal on the nuclear issue. I did mention in my previous videos that the Americans are doing everything within their power to exhaust a diplomatic option regarding a military conflagration with Iran. So basically what I'm trying to say is that Donald Trump wants to, if not genuinely exhaust all diplomatic options, at least from a standpoint of optics, he would like to make it seem that all diplomatic options were taken by the United States, they've been exhausted, and this has now pushed them into a corner where the Americans have no other choice but to go in militarily. As these talks are going on, the Americans have a second aircraft carrier strike group moving into the Persian Gulf. The USS Gerald R. Ford is en route from the Caribbean. So you now have two aircraft carriers that will be positioned just off the coast of Iran. And while the negotiations are going on, the rhetoric coming out of Washington is robust. You also have the comments made by Marco Rubio at the Munich conference, where he did say, I'm going to paraphrase here, but it's essentially where he said, "I don't think you can reach a deal with these guys or with these people or whatever." So what he was referring to was that we'll sit down with the Iranians, but I don't think it's possible to reach a deal with them. So to me, if you read between the lines of that statement, he's saying, we're just going to go there, take a seat, listen to what they have to say. We're going to press forward on our points. They're going to press forward on their points. We know that a meeting of the minds is not going to occur because of the divergence between what we want and what they want, which is then going to leave us no other option but to enter Iran militarily. Now, this article that I just read out earlier on, as I say, was from the Jerusalem Post, and the article further goes on to say, "We are much closer than we were before, but I remind you, a superpower does not go to war within days. There is a diplomatic part that needs to be exhausted," Amos Yadlin said. So again, this diplomat, who was the former IDF military intelligence chief, is saying exactly the same thing. You need to walk a diplomatic path before you go into go down the military route, because Donald Trump is somebody who is very concerned about how his image is portrayed to the world. And he's also concerned about how he would be portrayed in years to come. So he wants to know that he's ticked all the boxes before he does go to war with Iran. I'm saying that, let's say a year ago he decided that war with Iran was inevitable. These measures being put in place currently are to say that we've done everything apart from going militarily. However, they twisted our arm and we had no other option but to go in militarily. So let's have a look at what Mr. Yadlin had to say. Former IDF military intelligence chief Amos Yadlin said he would think twice about flying this weekend, commenting on the negotiations between the United States and Iran in an interview with N12 on Wednesday morning. Last week, I allowed myself to fly to the Munich Security Conference, he said. I would think twice about flying this coming weekend. So, if his comments hold any weight, it would insinuate that the United States are now in a position militarily where they feel they are capable of taking on the Iranian regime in a military conflagration. Yadlin, who formerly headed military intelligence, added in an interview with Morning News, "We are much closer than we were before, but I remind you, a superpower does not go to war within days. There is a diplomatic part that needs to be exhausted." According to him, many oppose an attack. At the Pentagon, it's unclear what they want to achieve. The president is very determined. The statement that all options are on the table is based on a credible military threat, which complements his preparations along Iran's shores in its airspace. Gaps still remain between the US and Iran, and terms Israel finds unacceptable. However, senior American officials told Walla yesterday, following the second round of talks with Iran, that progress was made, but there is still much to discuss. So again, you could argue that the Americans are playing for time, and as they did with the strikes earlier on, they lulled the Iranians into a false sense of security, and then they went in militarily. So I think the scenario could be the same here. The talks between the countries took place in Geneva at the Omani ambassador's residence at the UN under heavy security amid skepticism about reaching an agreement to prevent military action against Iran. The previous rounds of talks were held in Oman, a sultanate on the southern Arabian Peninsula, which has long served as a mediator between Tehran and Washington. At the start of the second round, a senior Iranian official emphasized that the success of the talks depends on the United States avoiding unrealistic demands, as Iran refuses to discuss its missile program and support for terrorist organizations in the region. Meanwhile, Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei sent a message to US President Donald Trump saying, "You too will not succeed in overthrowing the Islamic Republic." So once again, you're getting all this posturing coming out of Iran. I suppose for local consumption, they obviously need to make themselves look strong and not weak. Otherwise, their regime is going to collapse from within. And I suspect that the Americans are going to use an internal collapse of Iran. However, they're going to help exacerbate that by pounding the country militarily and not putting boots on the ground, but just using all their military offshore options. And I still think that those ISIS fighters that have been repatriated from Syria to Iraq will be unleashed in Iran to help play a role in destabilizing the Iranian regime. Nevertheless, time will tell. We're going to keep our eyes peeled on this one, and as more information comes in, we will be updating you. So thank you for taking the time to spend with us. I urge you to like, share and subscribe, as it helps our channel to grow and it helps us with the algorithm.